Hi everyone, it's Matthew McKenzie here again, and welcome to a video regarding mental health solicitors. Just to let you know, I raise awareness of unpaid carers or informal carers regarding someone who I suppose is caring for a person with long-term ill health. What I mean by that, basically, is I'm using my lived experience from what I've experienced in the mental health system as someone who's cared for a close relative living with mental illness. And I run many groups regarding how unpaid carers can get support, learn from each other, develop a peer network, that sort of thing. So, mental health solicitors, this is basically what this lecture is on. Just to let you know, I'm not a solicitor. Obviously, I'm not. I'd be doing a different job if I was. But that doesn't discount from what I've learned, what I've heard in my groups, what I've Googled around, that can show why mental health solicitors are very important if you are caring for someone living with a mental illness. Often, I might say, carers tend to look for solicitors when they are very, very desperate, if not at all, because I get the feeling, from what I know, mental health solicitors usually are assigned to patients, but they can actually represent the family and care as well. So let's delve more into the subject regarding mental health solicitors. And before we do dive into that subject, I'd like to say if you like the content of this video and you want to check out many other videos that I've done off my YouTube site, then please do subscribe. I'll try and release content once a week if possible, several times a month if I can. If not doing videos, I do have a carers blog. Do check that out, a Care in Mind blog. I'll put it in the video's description anyway. But let's get on. I don't want to make this video overly long. I do rattle on a fair bit. So as a reminder, the thing with mental health solicitors, when someone is sectioned, and what I mean by that, they're taken in due to having a mental health crisis out in the community, they're usually offered or meant to be assigned a set of solicitors because under the Human Rights Act, the Mental Health Act, this is because they are withheld, they're detained. And families and carers just usually leave it at that. They think, okay, that's fine. The patient has representation to a point if the patient has that insight is well enough to use that mental health solicitor to get support. But they can also, as I've mentioned here, provide support to carers. We may not know this. There are situations where carers might not choose to use the same representation for their loved ones. But doing so, as you may know, and this is what I'm trying to get at, um, free assistance, free legal assistance is diminishing, if not gone. So the idea of using a different solicitor, if can be quite costly, especially in some of the things I'm going to mention. And I will mention other things that I would think can reduce or should reduce the cost. But as mentioned here, when you're using a mental health solicitor regarding support for your loved ones and yourself, which is very important, it obviously is going to be related mostly to that care and treatment. But how can they help you? So let's look at the first thing, legal rights and responsibilities. Mental health solicitors, although and I don't think I put this right, is down about education. I think it's more representation regarding your rights as well, not just the rights of the patients. Although there can be some conflict, there are situations where the patient just doesn't really want to be detained, and the carer says, or the carer and the family says, no, I prefer that they get that support when they need. Because just look at it this way, on a few cases, if someone was well enough, then they wouldn't be detained. So it's sort of almost a catch-22, if you know what I mean. But there may be other issues that might not be related to the patients, but more related to how the carer or family deal with the services or get support for themselves. And I will go into this a bit more heavily in later sections. So mental solicitors, a good one. Remember, not all mental solicitors are the same, so do look around, try them out. They will educate, I would say, represent on carers' rights, including the ability to access information on your loved one's care, obviously with the person's consent. And do remember, without that consent, then by law, it'd be very difficult. You're not really meant to access the patient's right due to their freedom and choice. Mental solicitors can also represent regarding the decisions that that they are entitled to make the patient's behalf. Otherwise, they wouldn't be assigned to your loved one on the inpatient ward in a mental health hospital. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is just having the outcome would be a lot more better if the patient, yourself, and solicitor, they're all working together, obviously with, again, what the patient requests. But that doesn't mean you can't inform the solicitor of things you may feel is important. That is your right as a family member or carer. The Mental Health Act in itself, and I know it's as of 2025, is there's a new revamped of that act. It's been very old, 1983. There's been lots of inconsistencies, problems with that act, and it's due to be definitely brought up to date and turned to law. But even still, it's not just the Mental Health Act. You've got the Carers Rights Act 2014. Mental health solicitors, and a good one, can help mental health carers, unpaid carers, informal carers, families understand the legal responsibilities and restrictions that may be placed on them by law. And this probably goes down to, again, to information about patients' details and rights, but it could extend further to other things as well. So this is more complicated, to be honest. When you're looking at power of attorney, it's a big thing to do, but it's very important to do so as well. We could also even put it down to the person's wishes, really, in regards to what happens when they do become unwell. And a solicitor can actually help navigate families or carers on the process of obtaining that power of attorney or becoming a deputy under the Mental Capacity Act. As if your loved one lacks that capacity to make decisions for themselves, this is very important, especially if, and again, it is down to consent and trust and safeguarding. But it makes sense because if the patient had a job or on sort of financial aid support and they're living with long-term mental illness, if there's a crisis or if every time there is one, their life unfortunately does fall apart. So to have those wishes noted beforehand or agreements dated, it's easier to pick up the pieces rather than leaving things to chance. Do remember, we have to also look at what triggers mental ill health, and leaving things to chance can cause mental health to just spiral out of control, because when the patient is discharged back into the community, that they find things are a lot more difficult to deal with, which in turn causes stress, anxiety, depression, anger, which in turn can spiral back into another mental health crisis. I'm not saying guardianship and power of attorney are the answers to everything. They're not. But they're one of the tools that can help protect a family, especially if you're supporting someone living with mental ill health. And I've jumped the gun a bit because I was meant to go into this bit really, but I've, in some sense, managing someone's finances. It's a sad fact, really. Those living with mental health, not all, some are very adept in supporting their needs. But for the majority of cases, those living with mental health do struggle with finances, do end up in a lot of debt, do lose homes. So I'm just saying, with the support of a mental health solicitor, we can at least put barriers in order to reduce the crisis a patient will experience or crisis a family would experience. Not just finances, healthcare decisions as well, and the welfare if the person is unable to do so independently. And then things can be placed back on the patient once a crisis has passed, if that's in the agreement. But it's something to explore with a mental health solicitor. Tribunals usually held when someone is detained or sectioned a mental health hospital. So representation at hearings, a very scary thing, to be honest, if you're not actually attended one before, and you have your wishes in regards to the well-being and welfare of your loved one living with mental health. Now, if the person cared for is subject to compulsory detention under the Act, then the solicitor can represent yourself as a carer as well as the patient. It might not always be the case. You might have an advocate instead of a solicitor, but on this particular video, I'm talking about mental health solicitor. Advocates will leave for another video. The reason, as I said, they know the law. Another sad fact, really, this doesn't always happen, but can and has done so in the past. There are situations where, I suppose not an easy fault on their own, mental health services can cut corners, cannot always explain things, or maybe there's misunderstanding or lack of education on their part. And if you go without representation and agree to a decision or make a statement that leads to a bad choice, that is the risk in attending these tribunals. It's wise to, if you're invited, to have representation there. At these hearings, the patient may wish to want discharge. They may feel there isn't an issue with their mental health. So obviously, a solicitor can represent the wishes, not to the point where they may fully agree with that patient. They just said, look, hear the patient out on these things. They might even, the solicitor, I've known solicitors to not agree or advocate on the patient's wishes because they feel the patient is very unwell, but they would want to give them a chance to state what their wishes are and assist in presenting the evidence. This also can go to the carer's voice as well, especially in decisions regarding treatment, detention, and discharge. As mentioned earlier, appeals and discharge procedures. So your loved one may wish to be discharged and they can use the mental health tribunal, which is a meeting usually on the inpatient ward, on whether they can go forth with those things. Now, if you as a carer believe that your loved one is being unlawfully detained, and there are situations where the family or carer feel that the patient does have the right to be out in the community, and would benefit from this being discharged, then the solicitor obviously will help them understand that process on appealing that decision, especially if the healthcare professional wants to increase the section or increase someone being detained. This can also go the other way. You as a family member or care, especially if you live with the patient, may want to put your points in place saying that you can't cope, or you feel there's a risk of them being discharged if the mental health professional is saying there isn't any issue, there isn't any problem, especially when this is regarding safeguarding. Now, I know it's obviously a tricky issue to put in place to say, look, this person, I believe, is still very unwell, especially when the carer isn't a mental health professional. But we have to also take note that who is going to be caring for the patient or the person living with mental health. So yes, in tribunals, there will be cases where a carer may feel, look, I'd rather not have their loved one discharged. I've been visiting them on the wards, and there still are issues or instances where I feel they've been very unwell. And if you're struggling to say that, then the mental health solicitor can put those points across. This is tricky because it's due to the information protection, confidentiality, basically, regarding the patient. So a lot of it's down to consent. There might be some cases, obviously, carers might need to access mental health information regarding treatment information, and there may be very, very good reasons for this, but also maybe poor reasons as well. But this is, again, despite the reasons, mental health solicitor can assist in regards to request of information. They can help prepare you as a carer to request that information under the Data Protection Act or the Freedom of Information Act. And this will help you keep you informed about the condition of your loved one and treatment plans, obviously, where consent is required. As mentioned earlier, the confidentiality issue is that if, again, you as a carer feel that your loved one is being denied access to, well, not just your patient, actually, to be fair, the patient as well, to be honest, not just yourself, but if you're both being denied access to information about that condition, then a solicitor can actually intervene in severe cases to address potential breaches of that confidentiality. And these things can happen. I'll give you one example. Services are under pressure. Mental services are under pressure. They may lack the staff. They may cut corners. I'm just being realistic. And because they can cut corners, there might be situations where things might be withheld, or if there's a cascade of mistakes. Now, I'm not trying to butt head with the mental health system. I'm not trying to cause conflict and issues. I'm just saying that in some cases, being realistic, there have been serious instances, especially with medical information, and it doesn't hurt just to double check with that mental health solicitor on what support you can get for yourself and your loved one regarding these very things. Just to mention, this is again down to the patient's wishes and what can be shared and respected, but it is a tightrope because of the risk to the patient's health and well-being. There's always a tightrope is if you don't ask, what is going to be the outcome? If you do ask and they say no, fair enough, but you don't want to, again, I'm sure many families out there don't want to keep clashing with the mental system, and some may throw their hands in the air and say, well, fight that battle for another day. Safeguarding and protection. If you believe that the person you're caring for is being subject to the abuse, neglect, or exploitation, then a solicitor can advise on what steps you can take to protect that person. And this doesn't have to boil down just to the mental health system. It could be that I'll give you a great example. I know a carer that is supporting her daughter, who lives with mental illness, and her daughter actually also lives with a boyfriend that can be abusive or taking or exploiting the daughter's a vulnerable or his girlfriend's vulnerable position. So it's not just down to the mental health services. So basically, carer can speak to a mental health solicitor on what steps to take or what rights they have that they want to put forth in order to protect the vulnerable person. So examples like that. There are many other examples. There's also can be a very complex issues. But again, this is really how a mental health solicitor will represent the carer. This may actually go down to legal action. Safeguarding procedures. A good example, again, is exploitation of someone's finances, and the carer sort of finds this out and wants to see what could be put in place, what legal action could be done. So it's not always down to social services, although it can be. there can be severe safeguarding issues with services. It can happen. So it doesn't hurt to ask a mental solicitor what could be done. Another one is doles, which is deprivation of liberty. And there could be safeguards on that if you as carer is concerned about legal restrictions or limitations placed on your loved one's freedom. A solicitor can provide information about doles. This is also, challenging unlawful deprivation. These are very serious things to apply for, look into, because obviously it's a human rights issue. It can go both ways. You can apply on a statement on doles if you believe the person should be withheld because they're unable to support themselves. But it can go the other way where if they can support themselves, are they being unlawfully detained? So like, a good example of care homes or hospitals, especially if there are issues with support at that care home. You can't see your loved one. You don't know what's happening to them. They're showing signs of distress. And you want to do things in the realm of the law. Just got a few more. Um, and I'm going to issue a warning on this. Yes, they can help. Mental health solicitors can actually assist carers in understanding the benefits and the financial support options for themselves and the person that they're caring for. And they might be critical, especially if someone was in severe debt and it's a race against time to manage those things. However, again, if you're almost paying for mental health solicitor, I would sort of take another route and see other like benefits, welfare officers, support from mental health services, advocacy support before you go down that route regarding financial and housing issues. I would sort of use the support of a mental health solicitor if things are getting very critical, but they can advise on that. Now, this would include personal independence payments, PIP for short, cures allowance for yourself, employment and support allowance, and there are others as well. And this would be if there are issues in claiming them or issues disputing payments. It's also legal advice on housing carers might encounter, especially if trying to support their loved one if they have a housing issue or they may be at risk regarding losing the housing issue. So they might have to make decisions about that housing issue or make decisions about care home placement or special housing support. But again, they want to know what realm within the law they can do this on. So a solicitor can offer advice regarding housing rights or tenancy laws and accessing support for those who need specialized accommodation. This is very common regarding mental health systems, the realm of challenging decisions, especially if you don't quite understand why a mental professional has made that decision. So if you disagree as a carer with treatment decisions, and a good one is medication, you feel the side effects are too disruptive to a person's life, or you feel that the mental health care provided to that person is inadequate, then a solicitor can provide legal advice on how to challenge those decisions. As mentioned, it's always risky if you try to challenge them yourself. You might fall foul of causing problems with the law, or there may be misunderstandings. This might actually boil down to actually complaints. You might want to speak to the solicitor to say, look, how do I complain? And include the points that are of main importance. You might want to seek a second opinion from a psychiatrist or challenge a care plan decision. Mental health solicitors can do those things. And if you as a carer believe that your loved one's detention under that act is unjustified, then a solicitor can help you seek legal redress or advocate for the release of your loved one from involuntary treatment. It's not just about the patient, it's also about you as a carer. And I remind unpaid carers and families this all the time. Caring for someone can actually be emotionally and physically challenging. So a mental assistant can actually provide advice on seeking support services, counseling, or legal recourse if you are subject to undue stress, harassment, or abuse, or from that individual, from your loved one, or from the third parties. Good example, in the past, my loved one owed a lot of money because of lack of insight into managing it. And to be honest, I was literally called and contacted on trying to clear debts which weren't my own, or they would contact me asking where my relative was when they were actually sectioned. This happened, sometimes 4 in the morning, 5 times, 5 or 6 times a week, every day. And it was emotionally and physically exhausting. And this is where you would seek advice. You say those magic words to debt recovery agents, say, you're calling me and you're causing mental distress, even if it's not your debt. So it's things like that. And when you're getting that kind of support from mental health solicitor, it can help regarding issues regarding work-life balance or the need for respite support. Another big one is care and family involvement in those decisions. So being informed, consent or advocacy. If your loved one being cared for is absolutely incapable of making decisions due to mental health issues, the solicitor can actually help the carer advocate for the person's best interests. Obviously, the better way to be doing this is to make such decisions when the person's well, but let's be realistic. This doesn't always happen. So there may be a race against the clock to make certain important decisions. But doing this within obviously the realm of the law. And this is really down to involvement, being involved in a decision, not being it just completely left to the mental health professional. They should really take your thoughts and have it considered, whether it be through the Mental Capacity Act or through the appointed legal representatives. So yes, it's been a fairly long video. I mean, it goes on to way more on how mental health solicitor can help you and way more regarding the Mental Health Act. But in summary, mental health solicitors, they are a vital resource. They are there. They are provided to your loved one. And it doesn't hurt that you get that sort of similar support for protection, for advocacy as well. The navigating the mental health system is complex, especially if it's under law. So it doesn't hurt to get that legal framework for better advocacy, for better treatment and support for not just the person that you're caring for, but for yourself, ensuring not only the rights of the patient, but the rights of the carer. Anyway, I'd like to say thanks for watching. Do give this video a like if you found the video quite helpful, and remember, do subscribe for more content that will be coming in the future. Thank you for watching.